My name's Peter White. I'm a support engineer with Atlassian, and of course this is the lovely Joanna Thurmann from Polycom. We'll be presenting on tips to make your JIRA hum. So the agenda, I'm going to basically be talking from a pretty broad supports perspective. I'm not going to delve too deeply into any specific topics. Because we're support, we generally deal with a lot of varied configurations and setups, so I really want to just go through good best practices to use with your JIRA installation to make it all hunky-dory. And but the really good topic will be Joanna's presentation. So I think Joanna has been a long-time JIRA customer. She probably has the best JIRA that I've seen, and it's a very interesting presentation. So, but on to mine. So that's me in my normal habitat. Moving on. So JIRA works. The most problems with JIRA are configuration related. We get a lot of cases, people come in and I can't do this, and 90-95% of the time we're very confident that the problem is that it hasn't been done right. The configuration is not quite right. And it's the same with our developers as well. When we have a particularly curly issue, we'll go to the developer and we'll say A, B, C, D, E, and they'll be very enthused to take the problem in hand because they have the confidence that they know exactly what JIRA does and what it does not do. So if you are having problems, use the documentation. We've just moved it all into one space on confluence@atlassian.com. We've also got the forums, which are very good for any kind of development-related queries. So if you're trying to use the SOAP service or access this interface or make your own implementation of an authenticator or whatever, you can go to the forums, which are actually manned by or watched and commented by developers, our plugin developers and our JIRA developers, as well as the greater Atlassian community and the plugin community as well. And there's some very smart people on there, so use that. The knowledge base is excellent as well. If you find a stack trace that you don't know what it is or something nasty, you can typically just take the first line and pop it into Google, and the chances are you might find a listing for it that says this is what the problem is and try this. So, and if that fails, then of course, come to us, come to support. We're the aggregation of information on JIRA, so we can help you with that. And yeah, and of course, if you want to avoid these problems, the best thing to do is to use a staging server to test. These are all fairly. I won't yabber on too much about that, but yeah. This to me is really what JIRA is sort of, if you were to put JIRA in a nutshell, there's a lot of times when you want to put a field on a screen and it will, you're trying, you're changing the screen configuration and you check the context of the custom field and you've got the field is not hidden, you've done all these things, you think you've dotted all your I's and crossed all your T's, it's still not displaying, and it's so frustrating. Maybe you don't need to, you shouldn't have to know how a watch works to read the time, but that's the point of JIRA. It's flexible, right? Because nobody uses JIRA the same way. It all evolves in different ways, and to be able to get from A to B in your specific installation, you need to know how to get. You need to know how JIRA works. So it's very flexible. It's also very complicated. Ways around this is to use simple configurations. You want to approach, if you're administering JIRA, don't make the problem administration of JIRA. Keep it, use minimal schemes, don't have a one-to-one relationship, try and reuse them. If you're you want to think about fixing the problem, not thinking about how do I find out what the problem is or how to navigate through the administration. You want to sort of get past that and not have to worry about that because the problem domain is so massive anyway. You really don't want to complicate things. Consistent naming. You want to limit your number of administrators. So if you've got 10 administrators and they're all doing 10 different things 10 different ways, that's a sure recipe for chaos. So as well, if you can outsource your project administration to roles, That's a really good way of modularizing what you're doing with your instance. So you worry about what JIRA is doing, and whatever project that affects that particular department in that organization, that project, they can worry about that. They can worry about who's got the rights to do these sorts of things. Document your changes. We get cases where a case will come in, hey, I've just inherited a JIRA with 150,000 issues. I have no idea how it works, and it's not working. Excellent. If you document the changes, then you know where it's gone wrong and how you can go back and help us out too. And don't get frustrated because you learn things every day about JIRA. I learned about the scheme tools just as I was doing this presentation. There's lots and lots of nooks and crannies. And the interesting thing about support as well is when you get the cases where it's in a very sort of I want to get from A to B from this very weird adjunct, and we think about like, oh, maybe we could do it if we did this and this and this, and that's pretty cool. So to get around this, it's pretty well documented. There's a lot to read about JIRA. In fact, there's so much you really need to approach it in a sort of a different way. The documentation it kind of requires you to have it has a prerequisite of understanding sort of basic concepts about JIRA. Because the learning curve is quite steep. So if you're trying to educate your community with JIRA or new admins, that sort of thing, throwing them straight to the documentation is pretty much throwing them to the sharks, because you're talking about screen schemes, issue type screen schemes, and configuration schemes, all these sort of things thrown around, and that's painful. What you can do is use pre-sales put together a thing called the Quick Start Guide, which it just does basic, like, this is an issue, this is a project, this is a workflow, this is how they all work together, here's the screen. And it's a good foundation that you can point to people before they actually learn about how to do a specific implementation. So you want to make JIRA do something. We've also got the 101 guide. Now that's basically a new user guide. That's like, this is an issue, this is how you log in, etc. Very basic. So that's kind of really what I wanted to cover on sort of a broad with JIRA. Now I want to talk about just things that we come across quite often in support, which I think would be really good to know about and handy to keep, so if it comes up, you can do something about it. So first of all, get rid of the backup. We included it as a because we need to have a backup for our installations, in case something goes wrong. But it is it's a single thread. It doesn't. It occurs in the background. Conceivably, if it's doing a backup and then someone makes a change to an issue and then there's a failure, that data is lost. There's an inconsistency. There even may be remotely a issue, like a database integrity issue, which could be potentially very nasty, but that's very, very remote. And anyway, so the idea is to outsource it to the database where it's actually native, where it's a snapshot, where it's atomic, where you take, and it's actually a very expensive operation for the large installations especially. So if you get rid of that, you can save yourself headaches, which we'll get into as we go on. Getting back to roles, if you can minimize the number of schemes and use roles, you can delegate correctly to your project leads and get them to decide who is the appropriate person to have these create rights and these add rights, etc., etc., etc. It's done on a per project basis. It's very flexible. It's also less expensive than groups. A lot of customers integrate their LDAP. And in a lot of cases, you get a lot of users, potentially a lot of groups as well. When we're working out the permissions for, okay, do you have the rights to do this? The role is less expensive than a group. Workflow drafts. So in 3.13, we introduced workflow drafts. So previously, if you had 50 projects and they all use the same workflow, you would need to, you would have to spend half a morning if you just wanted to add an extra field. It's very painful. Now you can just make a draft, make the change, and push it out, and it will come into effect straight away. And that's with 3.13 and above. So if you haven't got 3.13, please upgrade. We really like customers using the latest edition. We know it a lot better than the older ones. Yeah. These are some plugins that I think are quite good. They're not supported, but I do still think they're very good. The JIRA Suite Utilities is it's available on Google Code, and it is an excellent workflow modifier. So, I mean, the workflow engine is very customizable, it's very extensible. We don't cover the individual use cases. So in your particular business instance, you might want to take, for this workflow, for this transition, you would want to modify the value of this depending on this, or this. We don't do that, but this is it goes a little bit further, lets you do things like having particular transitions or particular conditions or post functions for particular transitions rather than across the whole project. And it's a good base to work on extra extensibility if you wanted to go that way. The Groovy plugin is also very good for development. It allows you to make changes to your implementation on the fly. So you don't need to take JIRA up and down every time you're testing it, you're packaging it, you bring JIRA up. Okay, did it work? It didn't work. With the Groovy runner, you can just go to the issue, make the workflow action. Okay, it didn't quite work. Modify it. Try it again. Yes. Oops, back we go. And so that's a very good for rapid application or workflow modification. The workflow, the visualizing JIRA workflows plugin is also by the same author and is awesome because you have customers who have 50 steps in a project and you're going through the workflow editor and you're trying to figure out, okay, this goes to this step and this goes to this step, and it's a really non-intuitive way of getting a grasp of what the workflow for that project is. This plugin will visualize it, graph it, make a nice, beautiful little tree for you, and you can see exactly where it's going and what's wrong or if it's what you want. And finally, there's the SU plugin, the super user. I think it's a switch user plugin. It's a pretty simple little app. It just means that if you've got a user who says, hey, I can't see my dashboard, this is not there, you can just switch to that user and see it for yourself and correct it or do something about it. And that just saves having to, go to the back end and change passwords and all that sort of stuff which you need to do with JIRA. You can customize a lot of text in JIRA. We have an internationalization sync, which is a resource sync, and it has all the languages. You can set whatever you want. That's pretty easy. You can also modify velocity templates, so if you've got email notifications going out, you can work on that. That requires some more technical aptitude, but it's certainly also possible. Silent killers. So these are the things you really got to watch out for. We had a customer who had, this took several weeks they had an instance where they had, I think, 10 or 20 or 30,000 users in JIRA, and one of the users decided to subscribe one of their filters to JIRA users. Now, JIRA users, every user by default belongs to JIRA users. And it sounds bad, it's because it is, and it's even worse because at runtime when we have to do the permissions check for every individual user, and on heavily used JIRAs, typically the search you just made no longer exists. The collector's gone, it's cleaned it away, and that search has to be performed again. So, that can typically take days. It's basically going to destroy your JIRA instance, and you'll complain that it's performing badly, and it's an underground killer, and it expends a lot of time for support because we're like, okay, the problem is manifesting in this, but it's really something else. So that's something to watch for. There's a global permission you can use to say, okay, only these people can subscribe to other people, etc. POP accounts. If you have a POP account, or even an IMAP, if you have an IMAP account with multiple accounts and you have multiple handlers configured in 1-minute intervals, hitting that same inbox, and if you don't have the regex correctly, that a lot of messages continue to accrue, you're going to have problems with, well, I mean, it's not that much of a problem. You'll get problems with the speed of which messages are accrued, because it has to go through and check every message. You're going to get network latency issues. You're also going to get, you're going to run out of sockets on the mail server. Lots of problems. The real issue is that JIRA doesn't handle, I mean, finding problems with notifications is difficult in JIRA. It's partially because the functionality is, I mean, the debugging functionality is probably not as what it should be, but also it's difficult as well. In a lot of cases, we can't get in there. I mean, we can't see what the instance is doing. We can't see your environment. So there's a very much, we're back here with the joystick trying to sort of do needlework, which is not really up to it. And I forgot an XML backup service. So if you have a well-used JIRA, typically a backup should take 5-10 minutes. But if it's under a lot of load, it's a busy hour, a backup gets triggered, it could take 3 or 4 hours. And potentially, it's competing for resources with everything else, and it will take as much memory as can be half the memory of the whole installation, and that will just chug along and really cause problems in the long run. So please use the native backup tools. This is a relatively recent one. This doesn't really affect JIRA too much because JIRA is it's got a very low memory footprint application. This really only affects sort of the third standard deviation of users, the top end. We package JIRA with a serial garbage collector, so there are considerable, I think, performance gains that can be gained when you substitute and use. I think there's a parallel sweeper, there's a concurrent sweeper, there's a lot of work that can be done with the foundation. So if you've got an instance that has, busy hour, you have concerns about the performance, performance of JIRA in the busy hour and during these periods, there's a lot of work that can be done in shifting or modifying the foundation that JIRA sits on, and you can make JIRA more resilient. This is not really required for, as I say, 95% of the JIRA customers are not going to need this because JIRA is very good. On the other hand, Confluence has a really, really big application for this one. So if you've also got Confluence, look at that. But it's not a quick, it's a quick Java performance boost, but there's a lot of work there. So if you want to know more about it, we're around or make a case, etc. And that's pretty much it. Please look at the feature database, see what issues we have, vote on what you want, tell us what you want. We try and give you what you want. We try and give you what we want. But we need to obviously hear what you're saying, and we do listen. And I know there are many issues that are unresolved, and we hear you. But we're doing what we can. So I just will pass over to Joanna. So thanks very much.
Okay, hopefully you can hear me. Please tell me in the back. Raise your hand if you can hear me back there. Okay, excellent. So I'm Joanna Thurmann from Polycom. Before I start on my presentation, I want to give really a huge thank you to Peter White, Jed, David. There's a whole bunch of people from support that have done an excellent job for Polycom over the last 3.5 years that we've been customers. And I know you guys were probably all excited about the presentation this morning. Hopefully you're having fun at the conference. I'm not paid by Atlassian to say this, but we just love that company. We truly do. First of all, the support is legendary. So if you're new to Atlassian or new to JIRA, get excited because you really have come into an excellent organization, or not even an organization, it's just a cool company. So here's my little tips. So just a short thing of Polycom. If you have seen those triangular phones, they look kind of space age, like little triangular frisbees or something, or boomerangs. They make those kind of. That's what Polycom makes. But more than that, it's a telepresence video and voice solutions company. Polycom allows you to connect anytime, any place, with any device in a virtual experience as good as being there. That's what Polycom does. Our JIRA installation. So we're a JIRA shop mostly. We have had JIRA for 3.5 years. It's a single global instance used by all of our locations worldwide. We're up mostly 24/7, so basically it's up all the time. It should be up all the time. Of course, we do have some maintenance since it's a single instance. It's been migrated over the years from 7 different systems. It's used internally and externally, so there's actually a public face to JIRA. that people can get by clicking on off of the public Polycom website, a little link to enter feature requests. That's one way that we're external. There's a couple others as well for beta issues, for example. Oh gosh, now I realize you can't see that at all. Terrible font. Okay, so I'll just read that to you. What that little box said, this is the mystery box, is we have 130,000 issues, 120 projects, 340 custom workflows, 4,000 users, of which we didn't actually do true metrics on this, but around 300 concurrent users. This is by looking at some of our performance stuff in the past, and 340 groups. So that just tells you kind of what we've been up against and how we have gotten to tell you some of these tips from our experience. One of the things I want to talk about is adoption and uptake. If you're looking at rolling out JIRA and you haven't yet, one of the things we wanted to share with you is what's a good way to start this. First of all, buy enterprise, because the product and the enterprise features really give you a lot more than some of the other ones, and it's great. You should determine though what your must-have and nice-to-have features are. So everybody will, if you do analysis paralysis, whatever that term is, you're not going to please everybody. So you might as well just say, okay, this is what JIRA can offer you. Look at the feature list. So what I mean by get familiar with the JIRA wish list basically is look at the JIRA website and look what their most voted issues are, and just know that isn't in the product right now, figuring out what you really need out of those. By looking at that, you'll know what JIRA limitations are. So if you've been at one of the other presentations, there was a lady from the company who said it's not a good PM tool. That's right, it's not. So don't, if you're going to try to use it as a project management tool, you're going to have to customize it, etc. So know some of the limitations of what JIRA is good for and not. Develop standards. Peter talked about, actually no, somebody else talked about standards, but naming standards. Oh yes, we did. Naming conventions, naming standards, for example, and business standards. Having a staging instance, Peter mentioned. So we have two. We have two play instances. So basically, users, when we were trying to roll it out, people could just go in there and play, and that was awesome because then you didn't have to go through all this training, and then they had to wait a long time to use it. We're like, here's your QA instance. Go ahead and play around with it, and that's really how it took off for us at Polycom. Is we let all of our initial groups just go in and play in it. If you develop good training, you could just keep reusing that. So we recorded some training, and we have it available on our public SharePoint site. We don't use Confluence for that, sorry. But and last is do barn raising. So see the little Atlas guy holding a barn. What barn raising means is when people move to a new community, they build barns together. They get the neighbor to help, and everybody raises one common barn. What that meant for us, is a little anecdote, is we had a really resilient group of users by acquisition that didn't want to stop using their tool, which was Mantis. And they said, oh, JIRA doesn't do this. I'm not sure if JIRA does this. So what we did is we hooked them up with another group here in the US, and we said, look, talk to them, see how they're using JIRA, get together, look at how this is working out. And they end up not only being able to help the other group adopt and use JIRA and roll it out, they end up having to work together a few months later, so it all worked out in the end. So basically, have your users talk about the product for themselves. Some of the search, when I say get to know JIRA limitations, so every product is going to have some limitations. There's search limitations, many of which will be alleviated with JIRA QL. I'm sorry, I think I'm too close to okay, there you go. All right. So if you've heard of JQL, I'm sure you have. You're as excited as I am if you've got JIRA. Current limitations that are out there, like not being able to search Boolean, et cetera, are coming out. But there are some things that we've done, that I'll show you on the next slide, which we got around it. So even if you find a JIRA limitation, there are actually workarounds. We've got some. An example of that is a custom field search, which I'll show you on the next page. There are permission limitations. You can't do field level permissions. So one of the ways we got around that is we have workflow transition screens that just are available with a condition for some product managers or QA managers. When you bring up the fields on that workflow transition screen, it allows people to only be able to edit those fields on that workflow transition screen, and nobody else can edit at that point. So it's an easy workaround, and we're able to do that way. We don't have sub-components and sub-versions in JIRA, so what we do is we use cascading select fields. That was kind of an easy workaround. Yes, it does have some other limitations, but as long as you understand that these are ways you can work around it. Then you can't edit or effective date custom field options. So we have 350 custom fields, and a lot of them are like are select lists. You can't effective date. That means that if you have some fields you don't want available, they're still in that list. What we do is we created another field that's kind of the equivalent field. We just bulk edit into the archived field. That one is non-editable, so it's only in view mode, for example. And then some other limitations. You cannot rename users or groups after creation, for example. We don't use crowd currently, but maybe that's something that's not a limitation. One of our workarounds I mentioned was this busy screenshot, but basically when we worked around search limitations by writing, by figuring out what the schema was behind the scenes, some SQL to get us that, and we put that onto some custom dashboards that are written in PHP. So some of this really will be outdated with JQL, so I'm really excited about that. Another thing you won't be able to do with JQL, so we've done it this way, and actually it was developed by our development partner, Customware. You might have heard their name here, and they're a gold partner of Atlassian. What we did is we wanted to be able to search by custom fields when they were modified within a particular date range. So we have a field that they use for keywords, for example. Keyword, for whatever reason, they say, okay, we want to see when issues are modified, when this custom field was modified in a particular date range. And so this is a little extra search page that comes up with a list of custom fields, the date range, and it shows you the results, and the results are traversable just like a issue navigator result set. So another kind of tips on migrations. Somebody asked a question earlier in an earlier session, is it better to just migrate one project at a time or just do the Big Bang Theory? We initially would say go with brute force, especially if you're not migrating. So how do you get people to adopt? Just put it in and then let them go ahead and deal with some of the things later, because it's going to take much longer to roll it out than it really is worth, because JIRA does a lot of cool things that they didn't realize. If you're going to import data, so there's some available tools there already in JIRA. You've got Bugzilla, Mantis, Fogbugs, CSV. We've used all of those ways to migrate from our 7 or 8 systems, actually. Try to avoid SQL inserts. If you look at the JIRA schema, you know it's really, really complex. So try not to do that. We have a little anecdote about how we did that, and it really costs support and us a lot of headaches. Try to migrate open issues only, because you'll end up having to archive them later. People really don't know it, don't need it, and they think they do. If you create links to whatever system it came in, everything's all web, so if you create a link, they'll always have that data. I'll give you an example of something we did. Do your user mapping before you navigate, so I'm sure your user naming standards are different in the different apps. And if you try to, you can't rename in JIRA, so you end up having to define and replace an XML backup, things like that. So I just try to do your user mapping to whatever your JIRA username is going to be before you migrate in. And then we did actually use Customware for one of our migrations, and they're a great partner. This is an example of how we link back to old issues. So these are just silly links. I mean, basically, we migrated from Bugzilla. We gave them a Bugzilla link. We migrated from another JIRA instance. We give them a JIRA link back to the migrated issue. And then another cool thing we did is we developed a little, now it's called a gadget, but it was a portlet that lets you search by the old ID in Bugzilla. So if they typed in, oh, I know it was bug ID 123, you enter that in, and it takes you directly to the migrated JIRA issue. What are some of our best practices on just system admin in general? We already said it, set up staging instances. They're cheap. So that really helps a lot. I look at the JIRA logs for errors or warnings on a regular basis just to get familiar with what it's doing, and it does spit out pretty good log information. Once you're used to reading them, you can find stuff that you can avoid, get rid of. Then if you're familiar with the log4j properties file, you can put in some statements in there like you want your warnings or errors, fatal, etc., to go to the log or to the console. So especially if you're implementing plugins, you can specify the plugin to throw out warnings and errors to the log. I mentioned the training, so write a little guide. User communication, there's an announcement banner in JIRA. We use that all the time, like the system's going to be up or it's been upgraded or whatever. And then there is a send email function from JIRA. So because we don't use we use all our group management in JIRA, it's nice to just say from JIRA, okay, all the JIRA developers should know that this is what we're now doing in JIRA, or there's going to be a downtime or something. And then SQL warning from us. So we actually ended up updating the database directly for something with subscriptions. I'm trying to remember what the actual update statements were, but something to do with the user subscriptions and filters. We didn't quite know what we were doing, so it ended up sending rogue subscriptions to people, and like Peter was mentioning. So try not to try not to do SQL at all costs for migrations or just in general to update stuff, unless you really know what you're doing. And even if you think you know what you're doing, do it in the staging instance first. Okay, documentation. So what do we document? We document everything, and I'll show you in a sec what an example of that is, as far as our JIRA implementation. And why document? So like the Titanic, I would not have a job if I hadn't documented, because at the last JIRA upgrade, which we did to 3.13.3, it was like 12 o'clock at night. I'd much rather be at a party on a Friday night, and I get this during the import and export of JIRA, I get some error about could not connect to database. And I was like, I tested this already a million times in dev and QA. What's going on? But I vaguely recalled we had such an error earlier. I'm like 2.5 years ago when I first started, or 3.5 years ago when I first started at the company. And I actually do document every single odd thing I've ever worked on, little errors, little this. So I just searched that location, and sure enough, it didn't, when I actually read it, didn't seem like exactly the same problem, but there was a solution to it. I put in a little entry into our system XML.file, something, server XML file, and that made the import-export start up again. So that's one reason to document, and that for support, from the support standpoint, I'm sure that's excellent, because they want to know what kinds of things you've done. So here's just an example of our SharePoint site where we track our JIRA changes. And basically, every time I restart it, I do a total reindex, obviously any migrations, any SQL updates, velocity template changes. This is great just for me for future upgrades. So I know, okay, these are the 20 files I'm going to expect to change in the upgrade because I have a running log of that. And then when I call support, or not call, but enter a ticket, they want to know what have you done recently that could have caused this to happen. I just look up my log. So that can't really be overstated. Project setup. One of the things we would recommend, because we have so many, is 120 projects, is for you to standardize and try to really use project roles. Peter mentioned this. They're custom fields, so you can have a lot of custom fields. We do have a lot, 350, but you can limit context. So all your search custom fields aren't available in the issue navigator selection area on the left-hand side. If you don't limit a context, you're going to have, your user's going to come in and he's going to see that list of 350 fields and try to search on stuff that is totally unrelated to the project he's actually looking for information in. So if you limit a context, you basically are saying this custom field only applies to these 5 projects. And then you can reuse fields. The same exact custom field can be, can even have different descriptions, can be hidden or required, etc., based on other configurations and field configuration. Then here's a little anecdote about how we use project roles that Peter mentioned. Here's a real case scenario. We have partner access to JIRA, to our JIRA from externally. There are some partners that we work with for our products. We OEM with them. And they want to see just 1 or 2 projects in JIRA out of those 120. For security reasons, we don't want them to know everything. So what we do is we have a single issue security scheme that we call the external partner security scheme. But then each of the partner groups are in a role for each project called JIRA. So there's a role called JIRA developers, or JIRA partners, excuse me. And then the people are in a group that goes to that role. If you didn't use roles before, look into it. Basically, the example would be you can have one issue security scheme, a role called project JIRA partners, and then use that per project to allow access. And then the understand the resolution field. What it cost us more than a few stack of ones. It was a problem that we didn't understand initially when we rolled out JIRA, that the system resolution really controls that little strike through, that if a JIRA issue is closed, then it gets that strike through in the JIRA issue. That means if the JIRA thinks it's closed. 2, all your little metrics like number of open and closed issues is driven off of whether there's a resolution field. So let me take this back a step. If JIRA has a system resolution field on it, JIRA thinks the issue is closed, regardless of the state of your workflow. So if you did what we did, we put the system resolution field onto the issues already in the open state. And so they look like they were closed. That screwed up all our metrics. Conversely, if you don't put it on, then even though your state may say closed and it's been closed for a year, the actual issue appears open. So when you go to like the browse project page, it says issues open by assignee, open by priority. Well, those are all screwed up because JIRA thinks it's open just because it didn't have a resolution field, etc. So if you just, if you're interested, there's some workarounds around that. You can come ask me. Otherwise, every time Peter looks at his watch, I think, am I good? All righty. So look, this is my slide, and make sure you know who's driving your JIRA. That's what that's saying. I am one of 2 official system administrators in JIRA, but we have, and the other guy's really mostly just kind of a backup guy, like I'm gone today. So he handles some stuff. And then the other people are what I would call JIRA divisional administrators. And here's why we divide it that way. One, we know all those configurations so much better than everybody else. Like, so we know that if you have an issue type that goes to an issue type screen scheme, which goes to a screen scheme, to a screen, to modes, etc. The rest of the people don't know all that stuff. They just really know their business. They know that their workflow is we go from open to in progress to awaiting QA verification, etc. So, but yet they need some power, and here's what they need power for. What we do on the left column is we manage system fields. So what are the priority values, issue types, resolutions, and statuses? We create the projects, so we stop proliferating more. We manage users and groups, define standards, approve plugins, manage security. Obviously, we want to make sure that our customers and partners still retain visibility only to the stuff we want them to. And then our divisional JIRA administrators, they can manage the workflows, because I don't want to know what 80 workflows do. They can manage components and versions. They manage the custom field values, so that with our custom fields, they can edit, add, etc. Not edit, sorry, add. And they can do bulk operations. That's a very popular feature of JIRA. They can create shared filters, dashboards, group filter subscriptions. They maintain permissions per project, so not the whole security schemes, but permissions in the project. And they maintain notifications. And communicate very well with those 12 administrators so that they know when we're doing system level changes that would affect them, and we've trained them well, and it's their job to know what they can or cannot do in JIRA. Yeah. Quite honestly, yeah. But so that's my tip. My tip is there is really no functionality. You have a project administrator in JIRA, so if you're not familiar with that, I'm sure you are because it sounds like you are. You can give some people the ability to edit or add some components and versions. That's a project administrator. But these are people that need to do custom field values, for example. So they need the JIRA administrator rights, but at the same token, we don't want them doing triggering backups, import, export. So this is how we've divided it. I've come up with a training presentation for those 12 people. I train them, and I'm conservative with who new gets this. But that's a good tip for just making sure that things don't go haywire. Then, are we good on time? Because these were, I think, the miscellaneous slides a little bit. So our tips on plugins is, I sure wish I had known about the SU plugin, the Switch User plugin, because I'm still laughing about this. It was funny. We had a problem, and you weren't the one, Peter, that was helping us with this. I don't remember. Right? Yeah, I think it was David. But anyway, the problem was a user from India called me up, and he's like, "JIRA's performance stinks since the upgrade," and just a whole, uproar. And I'm like, "What? I don't know. Everybody else thinks it's all fine." And we use LDAP integration, so I couldn't just switch over to him without knowing his network password and all that stuff. So I did my due diligence. I tried to figure out, do some metrics, look at the logs. Bottom line, he had 62 portlets on his dashboard. And please laugh, because that's a huge amount. Nobody can see data. And he's not in the room. No, so anyway, I wish I could have switched user to be able to see that. So that's a cool plugin we'll adopt. But on the other hand, the cautionary thing is use them conservatively, because you don't know, if it's going to be supported in the next version. So you want to make sure that if you're going to upgrade now to JIRA 4.0, all your plugins are going to move with you. we had a problem with memory leak with one of the plugins, so that can happen. I mean, you know, it's only as good as the developers and their time on this. Consider performance if you're gonna roll out a plugin. We had some issues with that. For large installations like ours, performance is always a concern in everything. Then review the JIRA logs for warnings and errors if you're gonna implement a plugin, and the potential end of life basically is, you know, the developers are awesome, but hey, they could leave and go start a tiki bar, so maybe that plugin won't be supported. And that box it's a mystery box. Ask me later. Best practices on scaling. Yeah, more mystery boxes, no. I said it already. Allocate sufficient memory. That means I think, actually, do you know what the recommendation is for 100,000 issues, Peter? No? I think it was like a gig or something of memory for 100,000 issues. It was like the kind of recommended amount of memory for JIRA. That's fine, but we have a lot of concurrent users, like I mentioned. So we actually run at about 2.5 gigs of memory. So that's just to give you the slide you're not seeing here. Maybe we can, no, never mind. I'll just read it to you. Tells you how much memory you have. I'll read it in a second. Buy adequate hardware. It's not going to be your costliest purchase, and so just make sure it scales. Then there's a solution from WANDisco. If you've got a dispersed user base like we do, we're looking at it. We're a little constrained on money, but they do clustering and multi-site for JIRA, and I've talked to them extensively. It's an awesome solution, so when we're ready to go that way, we probably will. And then archiving. Our environment at Polycom, it's the last little tidbit here. I'll just have to read it to you. We have an HP ProLiant 580 G4. We have 4 dual-core processors, 8 gigs of RAM, of which 3.5 is dedicated to Java and 2 to SQL Server, which is SQL Server 2005. We run on Windows 2003 servers, 64-bit, and we're on JIRA 3.13.3 with JDK 1.6. And that's it. And with that, I'll turn it over to questions for either myself or Peter. Thank you. Is your mic on? Okay. Yes. Okay. Yep. Yes, it is. The question was, is it a single instance that does both internal and external access? Yes, it is. So we have a co-location facility in Sacramento, and that's where JIRA is located. And internal is all of our development organizations worldwide use it. Externally, we have partners that we co-develop our products with, so they have access to a certain number of projects. And externally, any of you can enter a feature request for a Polycom product into that same JIRA instance. Security, yeah. Based on projects and security, people can only see some things, yeah. Okay, go ahead. Yeah, and it's really cool. So if you haven't used JIRA much, there's permissions and there's security. And it first takes you a little bit to try to understand this, but once you do, you realize that's a whole boatload of flexibility there to how do you want to set it up. So we have only 3 security schemes. There's something we call internal, which is basically everybody at Polycom can access most stuff. We have external, those are not the actual names, but external, which is customers and partners, and then we control that further with roles. And then we have a scheme that's external, but with only reporters can read their own stuff, basically. So if you're submitting something, you can read and edit your own stuff, but nothing else. Yes. Okay, so yeah, it's a little glitch. Right now, we don't let them submit their own account. We actually triage those issues. So they enter a support request as not an anonymous user. We auto-log them in via a JIRA guest user, and then we create them ID. We send that out to them. And there's, because we have to do triage anyway, because it depends on which product, if it's a feature, sometimes we have to manually read these, because sometimes people enter a actual support request versus a feature. So no matter what, it's going to require some intelligent triage of those issues anyway. So it works for us to create them accounts that way. Yes? Okay.
Yes. Oh, well, I mean, it's if you can, I mean, using roles is just better for administration purposes. So you can outsource the administration of the project to the project lead. So I was just throwing that in as well as that it is not as an expensive operation. So if you want to not have JIRA having, I think it's because you can potentially have thousands of groups, and I think there's a bubble sort. I don't know. I'm not actually sure of the actual details, but I do know that roles are better in terms of the cost of what it is to perform the permission check to do whatever it is you're doing. If you've already got groups, I mean, I'm not saying go and change everything over, but it's certainly worth investigating. For the smaller instances, roles possibly really aren't the benefit from changing over. There's a lot of work involved, but if you've got a larger instance, then there's definite gain there. But on the smaller instances, groups are cool. I mean, it's really, this is something that comes into effect, I think, when you've got a larger instance. When you've got a larger instance, these little things, these little shavings can make a big difference. I think there's, in terms of the responsive time, so in the time the issue displays, you might save, I don't know, there might be, I don't know, I couldn't say off the top of my head, maybe there's 50 milliseconds or half, I don't know. There's some difference so there's a tangible difference in the time it takes an issue to pop up on screen, so.
I can answer a quick follow-up on that in case you guys want an example. So when I mentioned that we use roles, it's actually not that they're mutually exclusive with our company, but here's the real-world example. When we have, so we've got partners that we work with, and let's say partner A has got access to project A, partner B has access to project B. If you want them to, in the permission scheme, you say, okay, they are allowed to create issues, edit issues, add attachments. If you only used groups, you have to say, okay, for this project, the group partner company A can create issues, edit issues, add attachments, add comments. Then for the second project, you'd have to have a second permission scheme that says partner company B, that's the name of the group, can create issues, edit issues, add attachments, and comments. So if you only use groups, you'd have to have two separate permission schemes. And then now multiply that. You'd have to maintain all that. If you use roles, what we've done is we have one single permission scheme that says the group JIRA partners, which is a role name, that's a role name, can create issues, edit issues, add attachments, add comments, whatever. We've got that one permission scheme. And now in each of those projects, the role called JIRA partners has those respective groups in it. Does that make sense to everybody now? Maybe, hopefully. If not, come back and ask. So we do use still both. The advantage for us of using roles isn't really the performance gain of JIRA doing the search or executing it. It's the maintenance of the schemes and configurations behind the use of roles or groups. Yes? We actually don't do it, but I have a slide on it. So let me just quickly tell you, because we've... oh, my slide is gone. Okay. All right, I thought it was there. Maybe not. All right. So we're actually not doing it yet, but we've thought a lot about it. We've talked to Atlassian about it, and when we're ready to go ahead and do it, we're probably going to write something custom. So there is a project import export, which what that will initially do is if you've just you want to cut half of JIRA out, set up another hardware, import export everything, import just that one project and delete from this one. But that's not really going to help you going forward, because what do you do after that? So we came up with a set of requirements that's going to allow you to archive by issue, et cetera, and we're going to come up with a custom solution for that. There's a lot of considerations. We've talked to Atlassian about it, and there's a lot of things to make this a global thing that would suit everyone's need. Like, do you want to leave issue stubs? Because you'd have to if you want to have a pointer back to the issue. Do you maintain the issue keys when you're archiving? Those considerations is something that they're not quite there yet. So the partner we're working with, Customware, potentially on this when we're ready to go that route, had some good solutions and ideas for us.